Just big intro. Go big on the intro.
Shoot, dude. Ben's always wanting me to do some kind of YouTuber thing, and I don't know if I'm too good at that. You know what I mean?
Point, point, point.
The air horn.
Welcome back to What's a Woolpert.
Oh my gosh. We'll just let Ben do it.
What's a Woolpert, you guys?
Oh, no. Thanks, everybody, and welcome back to What's a Woolpert. We're excited to have Ethan here. Ethan, I'm going to butcher it. I can never remember how to say your last name. How do you say it right?
Schreuder.
Schreuder. I always want to say Schreuder, not Schrader.
Yeah. I've heard everything.
I'm sure you have. And of course, Ben Blumenscheid, but I've learned that one over the months of saying Blumenscheid.
Nailed it.
See, yeah, there's a little bit of practice. So, Ethan, first of all, usually what we do is just tell us like what you do, where you're at, located, that kind of stuff.
All right. My name is Ethan Schreuder. I've been with Woolpert a little over 8 years. I'm in the Dayton, Ohio headquarter office. I am the UAS team lead for Woolpert for the US-based drone operations. So Woolpert has drone operations outside of the United States, but since they are governed by a different agency, I just focus on the US stuff.
Cool. And so we try to do some get to know Ethan sort of questions. And I thought this one was kind of entertaining from one of the previous episodes, Ben. What was your first paying job ever?
Pet store. Worked in a pet store, yeah.
Okay.
It's a local like mom and pop in the tiny little town where I grew up in Wyoming.
Uh-huh.
Just like me and the owner, there was some ferrets and birds and gerbils and hamsters and a couple of fish tanks. Nothing really over the top, but yeah, I think I was 14.
That's wild. Cool. That sounds like my idea of torture. Working in the
I didn't work there long. It wasn't very interesting at all.
Sorry, go ahead, Ben. What was what's the best pet? What's the worst pet in terms of care?
Ferrets are very expensive to take care of. They require a lot of attention too. Birds are relatively easy, but get pretty stinky pretty quick.
Okay. Wild.
Yeah.
Awesome. How about first like official job out of college, in your career field?
Well, actually, in school, I worked at Target and ended up being kind of like a electronics SME just because I'm nerdy like that. So that wasn't even the department I was working in, but that's where I ended up most days. Target, everyone knows there's like the Target red card. There internally, there's always like challenges of who can get the most people signed up for red cards. And I ended up getting I was the 5th highest person nationwide one week.
Whoa. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Belated. All right. That's cool. So, but of course we're here because we want to talk to you about UAS stuff. Drones, uncrewed systems. One of the first questions I had, I guess I'm curious because, we've been in this game for, gosh, I don't know how long has it been since we got the initial FAA approval? It's probably been 10
years.
Yeah, 10 years.
Yeah, I think it was 2014.
Okay, that sounds about right. So we've been in the game for 10 years. What's the official term? I mean, do people say drones? Is it uncrewed, unmanned? What's most common?
It's slowly changing.
Okay.
The uncrewed is the more common vernacular now, just the unmanned of the...
Understand.
To include a lot of the women pilots and everything like that. So it's going to uncrewed. Formally, from the federal level, it's still unmanned.
Okay.
Because you've got to change that verbiage in every single one of the documents in every single place. And I think they're kind of waiting for big revisions maybe in the rules to roll that out. But a lot of people are saying uncrewed.
Okay.
They're pretty synonymous. We don't really pick and choose. It's just whatever comes out when we say it.
Cool. I mean, and I was knowledgeable in this field, not like you, but I was years back just because of some of the projects we were doing. And, are the drivers right now, is it more technology and sensors and aircraft, or is it more regulation and policy? Like what's advancing the ball or whatever in the world of uncrewed?
Well, literally this week,
the FAA Reauthorization Act is coming.
Thanks, Ethan, for rejoining us. We are reconvening a little bit later from our original recording because the FAA has made some changes to the, what did you say it was, authorization? What's
the FAA passed the Reauthorization Act.
Reauthorization, and this impacts how we commercially operate with our UASs, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
At a federal level.
Okay. And so what is the biggest takeaway with this recent, I know we have two things to cover, but the first one being this reauthorization, what is the takeaway for us and our clients?
The takeaway is that it can have implications on what equipment can be used in the national airspace or the NAS. Okay. So it doesn't say what you can use. It just says what you can't use. And there are countries of foreign entity that are listed. A lot of states have already adopted these policies for state agencies that cannot own drones that are the country of origin is from one of these countries. And so the FAA Reauthorization Act included essentially verbatim what a lot of the states had verbiage-wise as to what to include in the Reauthorization Act. We are still waiting as an industry from the General Counsel as to what level of detail that needs to be adhered to. There's a lot of exemptions and stuff that can be bypassed. You know, if it's research or education based, there's a lot of avenues that can still be, they can still use platforms that are listed on those lists or come from countries on that list. But right now that could impact just the entire market of what drones are available for people to purchase and use.
Okay. So, I mean, again, we're back to that because, again, I was talking about years ago, we were all concerned about line of sight, where you could see it, altitude, that kind of stuff. But the reauthorization is mostly focused on country of origin. That's
correct. Yeah, and it comes from a security standpoint.
Gotcha. Okay. And you kind of, so obviously there's, but it sounds like it's not shocking to most people in the industry because you're saying they've already adopted what states and other entities were already trying to follow for good practice.
Well, states have been forward thinking in creating these kind of rules, but again, they're only for state organizations. It doesn't mean that within the state, you know, take Florida, for example, who's had this for about a year and a half as law, that state agencies have to abide by it. But any contractor operating in the state, private entity, any public entity that's just not part of a state organization can still work outside of these. It's only state operations that have to follow these rules.
So if you're private industry, you can do whatever you want. It's just if you're doing something for a government or
if Woolpert was to do work for, say, the state of Florida, we would be allowed to use equipment that is not approved for purchase or use by the state of Florida. So if the state of Florida wanted to go do a drone project, they would be set on what they cannot use. But Woolpert, as a separate contractor, does not have those restrictions. The FAA Reauthorization Act would put those restrictions in place for everybody in the NAS. So regardless of what state it is.
Okay. So basically they're just limiting the type of devices we can have in our national airspace based on country of origin.
Correct.
Okay. Any surprises on the country of origin, or is it the stuff we already talked about?
No surprises, but disappointments, I'll say, in the manufacture and development of platforms and payloads. You know, you dig far enough down the rabbit hole of any circuitry or electronics, you're going to find made in China stickers. You know, that's always a concern, and that's what the General Counsel is going to help describe is, you know, how far down the rabbit hole do you have to go before, you know, anything after that, even if it comes from a country of origin, doesn't matter, or what is its actual job in the operation? Is it a control link? Is it just it's a plastic part that was made in China? Does that matter? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that, is still to be fine tuned.
So it's cut and dry if I were to say buy from a certain manufacturer that's now been banned, essentially. But what it's not cut and dry is that I may buy something that has all signs point to I'm legally allowed to use it. But now, like you say, you're going down the rabbit hole of the processors, the sensors, the control mechanisms, whatever it might be, and where they're going to say.
Yeah, it's not targeting specific manufacturers. The FAA Reauthorization Act is not. The Reauthorization Act, you know, one of them is China, that you can't have drones from China, essentially, or the communication link can't be from China. And one of the major players actually has worked with a US-based company where the hardware as individual parts are shipped from China to Malaysia that is not on this list. The hardware is assembled in Malaysia. It is then shipped to Texas, in which the US-based company puts its own software and firmware on it. And by going through all of those channels, the country of origin is not on that list. So that drone is acceptable, even though it's essentially a clone.
Okay. So it's exact same bits and pieces. It's just kind of went through a workflow that allowed it to be stamped as, eligible.
As compliant. Yeah.
Interesting. So I guess we'll probably see more of this as the manufacturers. And you said, again, what did you say? There's no elephant in the room. DJI is the most common example out there. And you said it's a great product. So they're going to continue to make that product, but they're going to continue to find ways to sell it to the U.S. market.
Right. Yeah. So in this case, it's from Anzu Robotics, is the U.S.-based company. The parent company is Aloft, I believe. Essentially is a Mavic 3 enterprise drone. There's a RGB version and an RGB plus thermal. They've rebranded it to be called the Raptor and the Raptor T for thermal. And it's almost a radioactive green, but hardware, next to each other, put them side by side, they're exactly the same. You cannot tell, except one is very green and nowhere does it say DJI. Even the case it comes in is exactly the same as a DJI branded Mavic 3 drone or Mavic 3 enterprise drone. And that is actually, those platforms are hitting the market. There are a lot of vendors that I've been seeing online that have been able to test them and use them and kind of compare to, how easy they are and how accurate they are. It's the same drone.
Does it cost more because it goes through that?
It does cost a little bit more,
okay.
But not, leaps and bounds more than what a Blue List equivalent drone, which is a DIU approved, has gone through the security testing and serial number tracing, all that kind of stuff. That takes a drone that's normally $20,000 and makes it $42,000.
Is the concern that there's some kind of spyware chip installed in the drone that's sending a copy of the information, covertly, or is it that it's uploading to a cloud that's managed by a foreign entity?
Both. It is my understanding that the physical, chip on the device is debunked, but the server is managed by a foreign country, an adversary country, I think is what they call it. And that because of that, the government has access to it. There has been a lot of legal from Chinese companies that have come online to post and, had sent letters to Congress saying that, we're more than happy to come and prove it.
Interesting. So it sounds like both parties are trying to come to a solution.
Yeah, but because politics in the U.S. work very slowly, companies like DJI are able to get ahead of it. It spent millions of dollars and many months to get to the point it is right now, which is actually being talked about in D.C. And DJI already has product on the market that is their product that is in compliance.
But so you're saying the focus, because it was funny, again, I'm dating myself a little bit, but back when I was more heavily involved in it, the whole big deal was line of sight, 400 feet, all that stuff. So when you first started talking about legislation, I thought you were going to be talking about line of sight, airspace, that kind of stuff. You went to the security side, but what about the airspace side, like the line of sight, the 400 feet, like all that kind of stuff? Is that stuff changing or?
A little bit. There's been a recent push. So Woolpert in 2014 was the first surveying and mapping company to get the 333 exemption. That was essentially like an airworthiness for a drone, flying a very large drone, very high, very far away, with a manned pilot part of the crew. In 2016, 107 came around and essentially cut that drone out of dropped that drone out of the sky because it didn't comply with any of the rules. Or the new rules. And then in 2021, there was, I believe that was the year, the new rule came out for remote ID, is what it was called. So that is, drones have to broadcast their position via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth for other people to pull up on a phone app or anything like that. Commonly called like a digital license plate. So you can, if you see a drone, you could pull up your phone, load a drone scanning application, and see, all right, from that drone, I know where it is, how high it is, and what make model it is, and some other information.
And that's commercial, I assume, right?
It's everything.
Any commercial
and recreational, which has been the biggest contention.
Okay.
Yeah, because that essentially cuts off the FPV community or home built, hobbyists.
What's FPV?
FPV is the first person view. So like think of like drone racing, you wear the goggles, which already is technically beyond line of sight. So whenever we fly FPV, we have a second person that's actually keeping line of sight of the drone, because you can't see through technology. That doesn't constitute line of sight. You can only use glasses or contacts. So all those rules are still in place. But when 107 first came out, they had all these avenues to essentially get approval for the things that the FAA said you can't do. Those are the waivers and airspace authorizations. So the largest or the most popular waiver request was to operate at night, whether it's sunset for, photography or weddings or just sporting events, outside the stadium, kind of taking pictures of stuff. Operating at night was the largest request. So when remote ID was rolled out, that was they essentially nixed that requirement, but they still said that instead of having to get permission every time to go fly, they just took the requirements of what you needed to go fly and just made that the rule. So you had to have a beacon that's rated for 3 statute miles visibility at night, which is approximately equivalent to 1 statute mile during the day. And then you have to do recurrent training after the rule took effect, which includes the rules about flying at night. So now, as long as you have a beacon and you're up to date on your certificate, you're good to go, and you don't need special permission from the FAA to fly at night.
So everybody that buys a drone now has a remote ID in it, and if you want to fly at night, it has the beacon. And so if I was with the FAA and some kid in the neighborhoods videotaping or whatever, filming a soccer game or something, they could figure out who owns it and what device it is.
Theoretically. So the enforcement date, that was different from the implementation date and the enforcement date. Okay. So, but also the biggest question is who's going to enforce it? But the purpose is really like a digital license plate. If there's a drone not following the rules, or someone has a problem with the drone, that there's some sort of avenue for law enforcement to track down the operator.
Okay. Well, so it sounds like it's the whole beyond line of sight, 400 feet hasn't changed much. They're just trying to find better ways to enforce it. And I suspect once that they find a way to enforce it, maybe they, release, what's the word? Relieve those requirements a little bit. But,
yeah. There was one other part of remote ID that's pretty important, and that is the operations over people. So that's a big thing. You can't fly a drone over people who aren't part of your drone operation, and you can't fly them over moving vehicles. So the new rule has 4 different categories, and if you fall into one of those categories, you can fly over non-participants in moving vehicles. Mm-hmm. So one of those there's only one system right now that the FAA has granted essentially a blanket wide waiver for. So anybody who buys that platform is good to go, as long as they follow the rules of the category that drone falls into. Mm-hmm. So that's the EBX. It's from SenseFly, now Ag Eagle. So if you have an EBX drone, it falls into the category 3 operations. And so you can, with that drone, fly over people and moving vehicles without needing extra waivers, which is normally a very long and can be expensive process. Virginia Tech had worked with the FAA and done impact studies and reliability testing and submitted essentially all this effort and all this time and money for everybody else's benefit, which has been pretty great. But they are the only airframe right now that you can do that without a waiver.
Is that because, so it has more safety features? It's more secured why is that one? I understand it's approved, but why is it approved for that? What makes it safe?
So the drone itself with the heaviest battery and the heaviest camera weighs 3 3/4 pounds. It's super light. The thing is made of foam. There's like 4 plastic parts that you can actually touch. Okay. Gotcha. The propellers in the back. So, even if you think of like the drone impacting someone, it's going to hit the nose, the foam nose of the person first. It only flies at about 35 miles an hour with no wind. Even before this happened, years before, when the EB first came out, there's videos that we watched of people literally letting the drone hit them and then describing what it was. And they were saying, it feels like a soccer ball. There's not a lot of a risk of laceration, which is the big thing that the FAA looks for from safety-wise of flying over people. Laceration and impact. So laceration, the propeller's in the back, and there's only one propeller. And then impact, you can't throw that drone fast enough or have that drone going fast enough to cause damage from impact. But Virginia Tech and a couple other groups worked on essentially proving that. So the EBX is good to go now for that. Everybody has that approval.
So it's basically designed so that if it hits something, it's foam, it's light, it's plastic. You'd have to really try to hurt somebody with it.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Interesting.
There still are avenues for getting those waivers. We have a parachute system for some of our multi-rotors that are significantly larger, that without a parachute would cause a lot of damage if they and hurt someone significantly if they fell on non-participants. So we do have avenues to get other systems that allow us to do those operations. But the EB is great for those instances that we don't have the time that we need to get that waiver for a different system.
How often do you encounter tight restrictions for like a project, like a collection, like where you have to record something or survey something that you're not able to get to?
That's a good question. Every project, as far as like a risk analysis, we start from the beginning. How do we get into the property? How tall are the obstacles? Are we going to have line of sight problems just within a 10-acre parcel that we're trying to survey? Are there any cell towers that don't show up in Google Earth? So all those things kind of play into effect of figuring out if we can fly. And then the next challenge is how we can fly. So that's looking at the airspace. Is it the property owner that is the one that requesting the drone operation? Are they going to be out that wants to watch the drone operation? All that kind of stuff goes into figuring out how we can fly. There's maybe 2 out of every 10 projects that have some area of the requested polygon that we can't collect over. Whether it's because the project area goes across an interstate. We can fly next to the interstate, but then we try to figure out, like, all right, well, our image footprint is big enough to capture the interstate without flying over the interstate, or the trajectory of the drone, if it were to fail, would still not land on the interstate. And then in order to capture the interstate and the other side, that means we land, we get in the car, we drive around the on-ramp and go to the other side, and then we take off again and fly the other side. And we've done that many times. So it's not nearly as efficient, but there are ways that we can actually still capture what we need to capture.
So what about, we've talked a lot about the devices themselves and the regulations and the rules and things. And I've been on a couple calls with you recently, and Ben, you've been on a couple of them too, but you look at the actual end result, the data, the deliverable, what it's being used for. And of course, we've got, thermal imagery, LiDAR, you got all your photogrammetry and your autocorrelation and stuff. Like, what are most clients, are they doing bridge inspection? Are they doing straight up mapping? Like, are they doing reconstruction for 3D? Like, what's the most common use case these days? Like, what are
the trends?
Yeah.
So, the digital twins, the 3D reconstructions are huge eye candy. Everybody loves to see what those are, but not a lot of people are using them because, one, they take a lot of skill to collect. And you're not using a system like a Skydio that has best-in-class obstacle avoidance. So you need to be able to capture something correctly. And then the processing power in the software to make those models and make them accurately is also a pretty steep learning curve. So everybody wants them, but a lot of people aren't asking for them, at least in my realm. We have done a couple of just bridge inspections, which are just essentially panning, scrolling through the photos that we take, or a video, and it's just to access areas that they can't normally access. We are doing a lot of just 2D mapping from imagery, but LiDAR is super big We have a number of systems that can be mounted to a number of different airframes. And so typically for those, we deliver ground and non-ground classification, and then you can use the ground-only points to make an accurate surface model. And we have checkpoints to validate the accuracy, follow all of our quality control standards and everything like that. Typically, when we're doing LiDAR, it comes with the photogrammetry. Most people that want LiDAR also want the pretty picture to go over it. So usually we do both.
Can you
there's only
been
a few instances
or not?
So it's tricky right now. A lot of the sensors are advertising photogrammetry and LiDAR in one package. Most LiDAR sensors have a RGB camera on them, but they're used for colorization. And that's because the flight plans you use for LiDAR are not the same flight plans you use for photogrammetry. So if you try to do photogrammetry with a LiDAR designed payload, you'll get okay results at best. And if you do a LiDAR, you try to use LiDAR data from a photogrammetry flight plan, you end up with LiDAR data that is unbelievably, arguably too dense to use.
So it's the same, I remember, with crewed, aircraft with sensors. You have clients that say, well, just throw every sensor on there. And you're like, well, in theory, you could do it, but you'd have to hit some real specific sweet spot to make it work.
Woolpert has a couple of partnerships with some hardware manufacturers and integrators that are coming out in Q3 this year with a payload that is designed for both. So it's got a stronger laser, so you can fly at higher altitudes that we like to use for photogrammetry. And the photogrammetry is a significantly better camera. And the field of view of the camera, the lens that they put on it, matches or closely matches that of the LiDAR. And so essentially you're capturing the same thing as you're flying. So it can be used for colorization and it can be used for photogrammetry. So we're really excited about that.
So if you've talked about kind of it sounds like it's a bit all over the board, which is not bad. That's cool. You got your 3D LiDAR, typical photogrammetry or whatever. What have you seen that's like exciting? Like you're talking about, the things we do right now. Like what's upcoming in technology that you're excited about happening?
So Woolpert has a lot of like terrestrial scanning, terrestrial based LiDAR, whether it's from a van or a mobile mapping unit on a vehicle. It's the same technology that we have a drone. Obviously, the ones on the road are significantly larger, heavier, and can no way be used on a drone. But what we have now is some pretty unique LiDAR sensors where we can take them off the drone and do SLAM. I forgot what the S was. I should know that. You cut that out. So SLAM is simultaneous localization and mapping. Essentially means that the internal measurement unit, the IMU, as it's scanning, is recording its position. And so as you essentially walk around just hand holding the unit, you can walk around and create a point cloud of an interior space or exterior as well. And then you can literally take it off and put it on a drone and then go fly outside. So you can mesh the data sets essentially at once from one sensor, do two different things. So now the ability to take essentially one sensor with a drone, fly the outside, take it off, and then walk the inside without having to set up a tripod, multiple times. We're doing 600 or 700 setups for a project for over 6 or 7 days, when with this kind of handheld unit, we could do the entire thing in an afternoon.
Yeah, that's because planning coverage with the tripods, right, and all that kind of stuff gets time consuming. And and I understand that obviously we go out and do the work and collect it, but I believe one of the things that maybe back when I was more involved, we now develop programs, right? I mean, it's not so much about going out and collecting the data and give it to somebody. Like we do this for multiple clients, correct? We actually help them develop a program, much to your point, like training. We're actually telling them how to go through the airspace, how to figure that out if they need permits, and how they go out and operate safely and efficiently.
A lot of our work started as just projects. Some of those projects have grown into programs, and some of the work that we've done has been programs right out of the gate. So it's not just, we come in, do our thing, and hand you back the data and you're done. It's teaching you the principles of how we collect everything, how to get in the air. We don't do as much of like stick time training. We're not vendors of equipment, so those vendors that sell the equipment offer training as well. So whatever organization we're doing a program for, they may have different needs than what Woolpert typically does. And so they may get a different drone than what Woolpert owns. And so they'll get training from the vendor when they acquire that system. But as far as getting access to the airspace, risk management, fleet management, flight planning, all those kind of principles are all pretty much the same. So we walk them through that. We use a lot of Esri products for flight tracking and maintenance tracking and stuff like that, and are happy to share those with organizations. We've done DOTs, we've done statewide programs. We've been kind of all over the board.
Operations, right? Airport operations too?
Yes, we've done our first big one. Actually, I guess the implementation program was Savannah Hilton Head. So they went from not necessarily not knowing what a drone was to they own drones now and they fly them fairly frequently. They have 2 different systems and they've been kicking butt. We went down and did a couple of demonstrations at their airport. Savannah has a pretty large National Guard presence, and so we were working with them to make sure that they were on the same page for what we were doing, and demonstrations went really well. We had a safety risk management panel, which was started from the FAA. Those happen when there is a proposed change to the national airspace. So we were flying drones in Class C airspace on the airport. So we were the first company to go through that procedure. And now, we've taught them everything we know. We're still do some on-call support for any sort of like small little thing that they may need. We check in every once in a while, make sure they're still going well, but they are off to the races. We take this crawl, walk, run, fly approach, and they are flying. They're kicking butt.
So teach a crew to fish, huh?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Ben, what else you got? You got other questions?
Let's do a future one. What do you look forward to, let's say 5 years out? What do you expect to be doing with drones that's different from today?
So LiDAR is always a big hot topic. LiDAR on a fixed wing drone has actually been around for a number of years now, but one of the largest fixed wing drones is the Wingtra. And they just in February, GEO Week announced a LiDAR integration into their drone. So theirs is probably the second most popular fixed wing drone for mapping after the EB because of the regulatory challenges that the EB has overcome now. The Wingtra, I don't think will get there because it's significantly heavier. But being able to fly in a fixed wing, you can fly longer. So if you can fly longer, then you can cover more in an area, which means you can survey bigger areas in a day. So instead of doing 600 acres to 1,000 acres a day, maybe you're doing 2,000 to 4,000 acres. And so now projects are getting bigger. But the problem with that is still line of sight. So you still have to have your operator that sees that. I really hope the regulations get a little bit looser in that regards. Maybe it's a reliability standpoint. But the line of sight restriction is not necessarily just a control link of, is the drone going to respond to your controls, but how is it going to respond to other aircraft in the NAS? So how is, if it's 10 miles away, how is it going to detect and avoid a manned aircraft? So that's really where those BV loss applications kind of come in. But seeing those kind of things, there's a lot of different companies, different organizations and applications that are getting those waivers, long power line inspections, that they're not operating over people. They're not in anywhere near controlled airspace. So they're a little bit easier to obtain that we put into it.
You want to ask another wacky question, Ben? I have my standard ones.
I don't have any other I don't know. What are some wacky questions?
I mean, the other one was if you weren't, time, money aside, if this wasn't your career or whatever, what other thing would you do? Like, what other thing would you, build?
You can't say photography. You can't say photography.
And you can't say drones.
That's what I love. I'd be a skydiver.
Is that a job? Well, I guess whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. That's wild. Why?
Because I love to fly.
Okay.
I've done indoor skydiving. I've been real skydiving.
How is the indoor skydiving? I've seen that. Is that fun or not?
It is a ton of fun. You don't have someone on your back.
The iFly thing?
Yeah, iFly. Actually, that same company that's just south of here is the same one I did. I did it in Denver, though. It's very expensive, but it's the exact same sensation.
Really?
Although it's weird because people are walking around you and you're just in a giant hair dryer.
Floating there giggling. Ah!
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, you get the giggles.
So, Ethan, this has been super interesting. Talked about, security, technology, sensors, odd questions. So we definitely appreciate your time and expertise on this subject. And
my pleasure.
Thanks again, Ethan. We appreciate it. We'll see you out there
in the field.
Thanks.
Bye.